we're going to answer exactly why the man we all know as Blackbeard ultimately decided to raise the black flag.
So to kick things off, we really have to ask ourselves a foundational question. Was Blackbeard just this monster driven by pure evil, or was he actually just a product of a massive early 18th century unemployment crisis? You know, it is so easy to just picture the pop culture villain. But when you actually dig into the historical record, a very different, highly calculating guy emerges.
Section 1. The Enigma of Edward Teach. Before all the myths and legends, there was just a guy named Edward Teach. Well, actually, scratch that. Even the name Teach was probably just a fake name he used to protect his law-abiding family back home. We really don't know much about his origins. People debate if he was from Bristol, Jamaica, or maybe North Carolina. But here's what we do know for sure. He could read and write. And back then, that meant he likely came from a surprisingly affluent background, with actual schooling. Totally not what you'd expect for a future outlaw. And by the 1700s, this educated young man was out sailing the Caribbean.
And this right here is a real game changer for understanding him. Teach didn't start out as a criminal, not at all. He kicked off his naval career as a privateer. Basically, a privateer was legally sanctioned by the English crown using these things called letters of marque. That officially gave them the green light to attack rival nations' ships. For these guys, it meant government protection, steady work, and even national glory, which is literally the exact opposite of the lawless buccaneers they would eventually become.
So how did this privateering gig get so huge? Well, in 1700, King Charles II of Spain dies without an heir, and that kicks off the 13-year-long War of the Spanish Succession. To fight this massive war on a budget, the English government just started handing out those letters of marque left and right to privately owned ships. They basically created this massive armed gig economy in the Atlantic. And Teach was right in the thick of it, legally privateering for England.
Section 2, 1713, the unemployment crisis. But then, everything comes crashing down in 1713. The war ends abruptly. The higher-ups in Europe sign a peace treaty, and just like that, the entire privateering gig economy evaporates overnight. Poof! Gone. So now you have thousands of suddenly unemployed, heavily armed sailors staring down a really brutal choice. Option A, go back to legitimate merchant ships, which meant backbreaking work and absolutely terrible pay, or Option B, go rogue, become a lawless buccaneer, which came with a promise of real freedom and serious riches. Teach, like thousands of other guys, was standing right at this exact crossroads. Teach chose piracy. And it's super telling that early on in his pirating career, he commanded a ship named the Revenge. That was actually a really popular name for pirate ships back then. Why? Because it hit the nail on the head regarding how these guys felt. They were furious. They saw their turn to piracy as literal revenge against a government that had used them for a war and then tossed them aside without adequate compensation.
Section 3. The Birth of Blackbeard.
All right, so having crossed that line, Teach now needed to establish absolute dominance in a totally lawless ocean stretching from the Outer Banks down to the Bahamas. Fast forward to November 1717, he captures this massive 31-meter French slave ship. He slaps some mind-blowing 40 cannons onto it and famously renames it the Queen Anne's Revenge. It's this brilliant, menacing little nod to the English queen who oversaw his old legal privateering days, but now with a fearsome 40-cannon upgrade.
And this is where he actively weaponizes his own image. One person from the time actually described his beard as a frightful meteor that terrified America. He'd twist this huge, dark beard up with ribbons, sling a bandolier of 3 heavy pistols across his chest, and supposedly even stuff lit, smoking matches under his fur cap before a battle. He basically wanted to look like a demon crawling out of hell. It was pure psychological warfare designed to terrify crews into surrendering immediately without a single shot fired.
Now, despite what the movies tell us, Blackbeard was not out there bearing chests of gold. His crew was basically running a highly illicit, completely pragmatic economic enterprise. They were primarily stealing staple commodities. We're talking sugar, cotton, tobacco, coffee. And they definitely weren't drawing treasure maps. They sold all that loot in safe havens and spent the cash immediately at the local taverns. An 18th century pirate bearing his treasure? Yep, that was pretty much a complete myth.
Section 4. The Final Pirate Choice.
So by the spring of 1718, the British Crown has had enough. These former privateers are causing way too much economic damage, so the government initiates a massive crackdown. They offer pardons, but back them up with the promise of absolute military destruction for anyone who refused. But before dealing with that, Teach pulls off this wildly audacious stunt.
In May, he literally blockades Charleston, a major economic hub, for almost 2 weeks. He holds prominent citizens hostage. And his grand ransom demand? It wasn't gold, it was a chest of medicines. Which really suggests his crew was either battling some horrific disease or they had developed a serious penchant for opium.
After that insane blockade, his fate really fell into the hands of two very different men. On one side, you have North Carolina's Governor Charles Eden, totally corrupt, in cahoots with the pirates, and eagerly handing out easy pardons. On the exact opposite side, you have Virginia's Governor Alexander Spotswood, a totally uncompromising, by-the-book military guy who was absolutely determined to use naval power to wipe the pirates off the map entirely.
Teach tries to masterfully play this system, and it is kind of brilliant. After scoring massive loot from the Charleston blockade in May, he intentionally crashes his own flagship, the Queen Anne's Revenge, in June. It was almost certainly a calculated move to ditch most of his crew so he could keep a way bigger slice of the treasure for himself. By midsummer, he casually strolls up to Governor Eden, claims his royal pardon, and thinks he has successfully retired as a very rich man. But Governor Spotswood was not having it. He found a massive legal loophole in Teach's brilliant retirement plan. That royal pardon had a very specific catch. It only forgave crimes committed before January 5, 1718. Well, the Charleston blockade happened in May, so suddenly, Teach is fully prosecutable. Armed with that loophole, Spotswood secretly sends Lieutenant Robert Maynard with 2 heavily armed ships to hunt Blackbeard down.
And that brings us to the brutal, bloody end at Ocracoke Inlet in November 1718. Teach's remaining ship runs aground, and it turns into this massive, chaotic, close-quarters brawl. Maynard and Blackbeard are literally fighting face-to-face in the madness. Maynard's sword actually breaks, and just in time, one of Maynard's men steps in and delivers a massive, fatal slice to Blackbeard's neck. To prove the deed was done and grab that bounty, they severed Teach's head and stuck it on a spike down in Virginia.
It's honestly astonishing when you step back and think about it. The guy who literally defined our entire cultural idea of a pirate, the absolute blueprint for everyone from Captain Hook to Jack Sparrow, was only an active pirate captain for about 2 years. That's it. He burst onto the Atlantic stage in his mid-30s, perfectly exploits a post-war economic crisis, burns incredibly bright, and is killed shortly after. So, I'm going to leave you with this provocative thought to wrap up our explainer today. Considering he barely sailed as a pirate captain for 2 years, is Blackbeard's reputation actually completely overrated? Or does his absolute mastery of economics, theatrical terror, and psychological warfare make him a legitimate immortal legend? Thank you so much for exploring this crazy slice of history with me today. Keep questioning the myths.